Emily Thompson stood at the window of her small cottage in the coastal town of Folkestone, watching the gray waves crash against the rocky shore. At 28, she had spent most of her life dreaming of something more, something beyond the narrow streets and predictable life that seemed to trap so many around her. The room was modest, filled with memories of her childhood. Faded photographs of her mother hung on the walls. Margaret Thompson, a woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep her daughter fed and educated. Every crease on those photographs told a story of struggle and determination. Nursing had been Emily's escape. Not just a job, but a calling. She worked at the local community hospital, spending her days caring for patients who needed more than just medical treatment. She offered comfort, hope, and a gentle touch that made even the most difficult days bearable. For months she had been saving every extra shift, every penny carefully tucked away in an old tin box hidden in her wardrobe. The International Healthcare Conference in New York wasn't just a trip. It was a dream. A chance to learn, to grow, to show that a working-class nurse from a small English town could make a difference. The morning of her departure arrived with a crisp autumn breeze. Emily packed carefully, her navy blue suit pressed meticulously, her presentation notes organized in a worn leather folder. Her mother's old silver locket hung around her neck, a reminder of the woman who had taught her that true wealth wasn't about money but about heart and determination. The local taxi driver, old Tom, helped her with her bags. "First time flying, Miss Emily?" he asked, his weathered face breaking into a kind smile. "First time in first class," Emily corrected, a slight blush rising to her cheeks. It had taken months of saving, of careful budgeting, of saying no to little luxuries. But this was her moment. The journey to London was a blur of excitement and nervous anticipation. Emily checked her ticket repeatedly, almost unable to believe she was really doing this. First class, words that seemed so distant from her working-class background. At the airport, she felt like an imposter. Women in designer clothes and men in expensive suits moved around her. Her practical shoes and modest luggage seemed to scream her background. But something inside her, a strength inherited from her mother, kept her walking forward. The flight to New York promised more than just a journey across the Atlantic. It was a journey of self-discovery, of proving to herself that she could step beyond the boundaries that had always defined her. As she approached the first-class section, Emily took a deep breath. The cabin was a world of luxury she had never experienced. Soft leather seats, attentive staff, an atmosphere of quiet sophistication that felt both exciting and intimidating. She found her seat, carefully storing her bag, smoothing her suit. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. This was more than a flight. This was a statement. A working-class nurse from a small coastal town, claiming her place in a world that had always seemed just out of reach. Little did Emily know that this journey would change everything. The conference, the people she would meet, the opportunities that awaited her, they were all unknown. But she was ready. Years of nursing, of caring, of watching her mother's relentless spirit had prepared her for this moment. The plane's engines roared to life. Emily looked out the window, watching England grow smaller. Her mother would have been proud. A woman who had taught her that dreams weren't just for other people, that with hard work, determination, and a kind heart, anything was possible. As the first-class cabin settled around her, Emily felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was about to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. Her journey was just beginning. The plane lifted into the sky, carrying with it a woman about to discover her true potential. This moment was more than a flight. It was a declaration. The first-class cabin hummed with quiet conversation and the soft rustle of newspapers. Emily sat quietly, her fingers occasionally touching the silver locket around her neck, a nervous habit she'd inherited from her mother. Rebecca, Matthews noticed her immediately. Dressed in an expensive Burberry coat with perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails, she represented everything Emily had never been. Wealth, confidence, privilege. Rebecca's eyes swept over Emily's modest navy suit, taking in every detail. The look was unmistakable. a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed judgment. Emily felt the weight of that gaze, remembering countless moments from her childhood when she had felt out of place. The flight attendant moved smoothly between the seats, offering champagne and warm towels. When she reached Emily, there was a moment of hesitation. The unspoken question hung in the air. Did she really belong here? Emily's hands trembled slightly as she accepted a glass of water. She knew she looked different from the other passengers. Her practical shoes, her carefully mended suit, the slight calluses on her hands from years of nursing. They all told a story of hard work and modest means. Thomas Henderson, a well-dressed gentleman sitting across the aisle, watched the scene unfold. He had seen this dynamic before, the subtle class tensions that bubbled just beneath the surface of polite society. There was something about Emily that caught his attention, a quiet dignity, a strength that seemed to radiate from her. Rebecca couldn't contain herself any longer. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the cabin's quiet atmosphere. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and precise. "I don't believe you're in the right section." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several passengers turned, slightly, their conversations dropping to hushed whispers. Emily felt the heat rising to her cheeks, a familiar feeling of being exposed, of being found wanting. But something was different this time. Years of nursing had taught Emily to stand her ground. She had comforted dying patients, managed emergency rooms during impossible shifts, dealt with challenging families and complex medical situations. This was nothing compared to those moments. Emily's hand moved to her ticket, her fingers steady despite the racing of her heart. She looked directly at Rebecca, meeting her gaze with a calmness that surprised even herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice clear and controlled. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Thomas watched with growing interest. The flight attendant paused, sensing the tension building between the two women. Rebecca's perfectly painted lips pressed together. She hadn't expected this quiet resistance. In her world, a look was usually enough to make people shrink away. But Emily wasn't shrinking. She was standing her ground. Around them, the first-class cabin became a microcosm of something larger. It was more than just a dispute about a seat. It was about belonging, about who has the right to occupy certain spaces, about the invisible lines that society draws between people. Emily thought about her mother. Margaret Thompson had worked 3 jobs, had sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities. She had taught Emily that your worth isn't determined by the clothes you wear or the money in your bank account. The plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, carrying this moment of tension. The hum of the engine seemed to echo the unspoken challenge between Emily and Rebecca. Thomas shifted in his seat, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had seen many things in his years of travel, but there was something special about this moment. Something about the quiet determination of the young nurse that spoke of something deeper. Emily adjusted her locket, a small gesture of comfort. She wasn't going to apologize for being here. She wasn't going to shrink. This was her moment, her journey, her chance to prove that dreams don't have a dress code. The first-class cabin waited, suspended between challenge and resolution. The silence in the first-class cabin grew thick with tension. Emily's fingers tightened around her ticket, a small but powerful symbol of her right to be there. She thought about the months of extra shifts, the careful saving, the dreams that had brought her to this moment. "I've paid for this ticket," Emily said, her voice steady and clear. The words surprised even herself. There was a strength there she hadn't known existed. Years of nursing had taught her something about standing her ground, about finding courage in unexpected moments. Rebecca seemed taken aback. Her perfectly manicured hand hovered mid-air, her planned dismissal suddenly interrupted by Emily's quiet defiance. The other passengers began to take notice, some discreetly glancing over, others trying to appear uninterested while clearly listening. Thomas Henderson leaned forward slightly, his eyes showing a mix of curiosity and respect. He had traveled the world, seen countless interactions, but there was something different about this moment. Something honest, something real. The flight attendant approached, sensing the rising tension. Her professional smile was carefully balanced, ready to mediate but not to take sides. She represented the thin line between civility and confrontation. Emily's mind drifted to her mother for a moment. Margaret Thompson had never been one to back down. She had fought her entire life, working, multiple jobs, raising a daughter alone, proving her worth in a world that often tried to minimize her existence. Those lessons were etched into Emily's very being. Perhaps, Rebecca began, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence, there's been a misunderstanding. But Emily was done explaining. She pulled out her conference documents, carefully tucked in a folder she had protected like a treasure. The papers represented more than just a professional opportunity. They were a testament to her hard work, her dreams, her potential. Thomas caught a glimpse of the documents. Healthcare Conference, New York. His interest was genuinely piqued now. As a philanthropist who had supported numerous medical initiatives, he recognized passion when he saw it. The other passengers in the first-class cabin began to shift. Some looked uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others seemed quietly supportive. An older gentleman near the window gave Emily a subtle nod of encouragement. "I've worked every extra shift for a year to be here," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "Every penny saved, every moment of overtime. This isn't just a trip. This is my chance to learn, to grow, to make a difference." Rebecca's earlier confidence began to crumble. The young nurse wasn't just defending her seat. She was revealing a story of determination that couldn't be dismissed by a designer coat or a condescending look. The plane continued its journey, miles of ocean stretching beneath them. But in this moment, the real journey was happening inside the first-class cabin. A journey of understanding, of breaking down invisible barriers. Thomas watched carefully. He recognized something special in Emily, a spirit that couldn't be confined by expectations or social boundaries. Her quiet determination was more powerful than any designer outfit or first-class ticket. The flight attendant looked between Emily and Rebecca, seeing more than just a seating dispute. She saw a moment of human connection, of challenging preconceived notions. Emily's hand unconsciously touched her mother's locket. It was her connection to the woman who had taught her that true worth wasn't measured by money or status, but by character and determination. Rebecca seemed to deflate slightly. The armor of privilege was slowly being stripped away, replaced by something more human, understanding, respect. The cabin remained charged with unspoken emotions. Emily had done more than defend her seat. She had challenged an entire system of unspoken assumptions. She had shown that dreams don't have a dress code, that passion can't be confined by social boundaries. As the plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, Emily knew something had changed, not just in this moment, but in her entire understanding of herself. She was more than just a nurse from a small coastal town. She was a dream in motion. The flight attendant approached with the precision of a professional trained to handle delicate situations. Her crisp uniform and calm demeanor created an immediate sense of authority. She looked at Emily, then at Rebecca, her eyes carefully assessing the tension. "May I see your ticket, madam?" she asked Emily, her voice professional and neutral. Emily's hands were steady now. The earlier nervousness had transformed into a quiet confidence. She handed over the ticket, watching as the attendant examined it carefully. Years of nursing had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to breathe through moments of uncertainty. The cabin held its breath. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice now watched with barely concealed interest. Thomas Henderson leaned forward slightly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the unfolding scene. The flight attendant's fingers moved professionally across the ticket, scanning, checking, verifying. Each movement was deliberate, each moment stretching longer than it should. Rebecca's perfectly painted fingers gripped her designer handbag. Her earlier confidence was crumbling, replaced by an uncomfortable mixture of embarrassment and uncertainty. "Everything is in order," the attendant announced finally. Her words fell like a gentle but firm judgment. This passenger is exactly where she should be. A subtle murmur ran through the first-class cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others nodded almost imperceptibly. The unspoken social drama was resolving itself. Thomas saw his opportunity. As the tension began to dissipate, he leaned across the aisle towards Emily. "Impressive presentation materials," he said, nodding towards her carefully organized folder. "Would you like to share what brings you to New York?" Emily's professional training kicked in. She straightened her modest navy suit, her hands moving with a practiced calm. "I'm attending a global healthcare conference," she explained. "I work in community nursing, focusing on underserved populations in coastal regions." Her words carried a quiet passion. This wasn't just a job for her, this was a calling, a mission to make healthcare more accessible, more human. Thomas's interest was genuinely piqued. As a healthcare philanthropist, he had heard countless presentations, but there was something different about Emily, a authenticity, a genuine commitment that couldn't be manufactured. "Which areas specifically?" he asked, his professional curiosity rising. Emily began to explain her work, the challenges of providing healthcare in small coastal communities, the unique medical needs of isolated populations. Her eyes lit up, her earlier nervousness completely forgotten. Rebecca sat quietly, her earlier judgment completely transformed. She was witnessing something unexpected, a working-class nurse who carried herself with more dignity and purpose than many wealthy professionals she knew. The flight attendant, having resolved the earlier tension, moved away with a professional smile. But she had seen something special, a moment of human connection that transcended social boundaries. Thomas listened intently. He recognized passion when he heard it. Years of supporting medical initiatives had taught him to identify true commitment. "We should discuss this further," he said finally. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a business card. "I'm involved with several healthcare foundations. Your work sounds fascinating." Emily accepted the card, almost unable to believe what was happening. What had started as a potential confrontation was turning into an unexpected opportunity. The plane continued its journey across the Atlantic. Miles of ocean stretched beneath them, carrying stories of human connection, of breaking down invisible barriers. Rebecca remained silent, her earlier confidence completely dismantled. She had entered this flight believing she understood the world. Now she was learning something different. Thomas saw more than just a potential professional connection. He saw a story of determination, of a young woman who had fought to create opportunities for herself and her community. Emily touched her mother's locket, a small gesture of connection to the woman who had taught her that true worth wasn't about where you came from, but about your passion and commitment. The first-class cabin hummed with a new energy. Something had shifted. Not just in this moment, but in the understanding of what potential really looks like. Dreams, Emily was learning, don't have a dress code. The plane began its descent into New York, the city's skyline emerging like a glittering promise against the late afternoon sky. Emily's heart raced with anticipation. What had begun as a simple journey was transforming into something much larger. Thomas Henderson had been talking with her for the past hour, asking detailed questions about her community, healthcare work. His interest was genuine, his questions precise and thoughtful. Emily found herself explaining the challenges of healthcare in small coastal communities, her passion evident in every word. "Your approach is remarkable," Thomas said, his experienced eyes studying her. "Most people talk about healthcare. You're actually doing something about it." As the plane touched down, several passengers who had witnessed the earlier confrontation approached Emily. An older doctor, a nurse from a different hospital, a social worker. Each offered words of support, of recognition. Rebecca sat quietly, her earlier attitude completely transformed. She had watched the entire interaction, seeing something she hadn't expected. A working-class nurse who carried more dignity than many wealthy professionals she knew. "I'd like to discuss a potential funding opportunity for your community hospital," Thomas said, handing her a business card with an embossed Healthcare Foundation logo. His offer was serious, professional, unexpected. The airport bustled with energy, thousands of stories intersecting, lives crossing paths in momentary connections. But for Emily, this moment felt different. Something fundamental was changing. She thought about her mother, Margaret Thompson, the woman who had worked 3 jobs, who had taught her that dreams weren't just for other people, who had shown her that determination could break through any barrier. Walking through the airport, Emily felt different. The modest navy suit she had worried about earlier now seemed like a badge of honor. Her practical shoes, her carefully organized folder, they told a story of hard work and genuine passion. Thomas walked beside her, discussing potential collaborations. The conference was no longer just an opportunity to learn. It was becoming a gateway to something much larger. "Your approach to community healthcare is unique," he explained. "Most presentations are theoretical. Yours is practical, ground-level work." The city of New York surrounded them, a metropolis of opportunity, of endless potential. But Emily's mind was already returning to her small coastal town, to the community hospital that had been her entire world. Rebecca watched from a distance, something shifting in her understanding of the world. She had entered the flight believing in rigid social boundaries. Now she was seeing something different. Other passengers from the flight approached Emily, offering business cards, words of support. The earlier tension had transformed into something positive, something hopeful. "Sometimes," Thomas said quietly, "the most important work happens in the smallest places." Emily remembered every difficult shift at the community hospital, the patients with complex needs, the families struggling to access basic health care. Her work wasn't about grand gestures. It was about real human connections. The business card from Thomas felt heavy in her hand, a potential bridge between her small world and larger opportunities. Not just funding, but recognition of the important work happening in overlooked communities. New York's energy pulsed around them, skyscrapers reaching towards the sky, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. But for Emily, the most important story was her own, a story of determination, of breaking through invisible barriers. Her mother's locket felt warm against her skin, a reminder of where she came from, of the woman who had taught her that true wealth wasn't about money but about heart, about commitment. The conference was just beginning, but Emily knew something had already changed, not just in her professional journey, but in her entire understanding of what was possible. Some journeys are about destinations, some are about discovering who you truly are. Emily Thompson, a nurse from a small coastal town, was about to show the world exactly who she was. The city welcomed her, full of promise and potential. Her real journey was just beginning.